Since the Oblong's IT crowd, way before Euphoria, there were Twin Peaks and Friends and trans people still on the TV. Today's kids in high school might tell me that I'm uncool, because I'm still preoccupied with 1985. More precisely, 1988, when Golden Girls was at its peak performance, winning multiple awards such as each of the 4 protagonist characters getting an Emmy, which is quite an achievement. Who are these 4 characters? Well, we have Dorothy, a blunt, practical, angry substitute teacher who got divorced after her husband left for a younger flight attendant. Rose, a farm girl whose happy marriage was ruined by her husband dying and who is the nice and warm person of the group. Blanche, the southern belle who grew up rich and on a plantation, which, yes, does imply some bad things about her family's wealth that do actually get brought up in an episode, but she was also married and then her husband died. Since then she's been involved with quite a few other people, which leads to the comedy around her centering on that perceived lustfulness. And finally, Sophia, the mother of Dorothy, that first character I mentioned, who came to the USA when she was younger to escape an arranged marriage in Sicily, and whose husband is also dead. And she is portrayed as the fast, intelligent one of the group, despite her advanced age. And that's the group. A group of older women who all live together in the same house in Florida, and whose main shared connection is that they are older women without a definitive long-term man in their lives. Which is actually kind of a big deal because so often we link people to their partners in a way that denies them their individuality. And with older women, this can mean writing them off as people almost entirely, thanks to that whole patriarchal system baloney. So having a show that focuses on those women and gives them a chance to live after they are no longer with their husbands is quite a cool premise for a sitcom/comedy drama. And the show was also not afraid of including discussions around minority issues and incorporating them, such as with Sophia's son Phil, who was a cross-dresser, or Blanche's brother Clayton, who was a closeted gay man before coming out during the show's run and getting married to his boyfriend, or Season 2's Episode 5, which featured Jean, a lesbian friend of Dorothy's who develops a crush on Rose, and while it doesn't go anywhere, the end of the episode involves a kind talk between the two about how they can remain good friends, and involves them sympathizing with one another over the loss of their partners. Because gay or straight, we are all human, and deal with oft-times the same things in life. But we wouldn't be here talking today if there wasn't a damn trans episode to get into, and I am realizing this has been a long-ass intro, but I really like this show. I got into it a while back because there is a trans episode and I wanted to see what else was going on, and the answer was kind of a lot of cool stuff.
I wanted you to meet Doug for a very important reason. Blanche, we're getting married.
That's impossible, Clayton. Brothers can't marry sisters.
It might actually be one of the better aged sitcoms, a field that perhaps isn't that competitive, but is still quite good to see. Anyway, our trans episode is Season 3's Episode 7, Strange Bedfellows, which centres around a politician named Gil Kessler, who might be trans. Guess you'll have to watch me talk about it to find out if he is or not, eh?
And that's why I'm going to be honest with you about something else, too. I'm not who you think I am.
The episode begins with Gil Kessler doing a political speech at an event hosted within the home by Rose, Blanche and Dorothy, before Sophia comes out and makes some comments about him that require her to get moved into the kitchen by Dorothy.
You call that a slogan?
Excuse me, sir.
Easy on the arm, Dorothy. You break it, you pay for it.
They both discuss the fact that Gil Kessler is a big ol' wimp, that while he might be bright and dedicated, he just isn't that tough of a guy. Sophia also talks about how there is something off about him, saying this line in particular.
That's not all. There's something else I don't like about him.
What?
I don't know. It's a hunch. I can't put my finger on it, but if I could, I would have to wash it.
Which, knowing the context as we might suspect we do around Gil Kessler, That's a worryingly nasty sentiment from the show there about a trans man. An attitude that I really, really hope doesn't translate into making this a shitty episode for our community. Dorothy gets Sophia to stay in the kitchen because she doesn't want her mother embarrassing her in front of these people. An honestly pretty fair comment because that is what Sophia does a lot in many cases throughout the show. And our next scene is Gil Kessler leaving and talking about how he needs to get stuff sorted out for his wife, which leads to the ladies talking about their involvement in politics and whether Gil stands a chance.
Your Gil Kessler doesn't stand a chance of winning.
Who says?
The Miami Post and Miami's own Sophia Petrillo.
Before Blanche heads off to Gil's house because he left a folder at their place. So far, a pretty regular episode, except for that comment by Sophia earlier on. But now we are heading towards the major plot point of this narrative, which is that Gil Kessler had an affair with a woman according to the newspapers, and that woman, based off of the pictures, looks like it could just be Blanche, the character whose big identity is being a floozy, as the other women might call her.
Rose Blanche is that little floozy.
But as Blanche says in conversation, she never did any of this affair stuff. She was just dropping the things off and talking with Gil for 2 hours, which the other women do believe when she honestly opens up to them and confirms to them that she isn't lying about this. Which is nice to see that they do trust their friend even with that perceived bias of her. That while they might think she is a floozy, they ultimately will take her side.
Now, nothing else happened. I swear. Okay?
Okay.
Okay.
And we learn that Gil is having a press conference soon, and will be clearing up these rumours himself. So they should just leave it to him to try and save his political career, because, well, it is his name plastered all over the articles, not Blanche's. And Sophia keeps telling everybody how she knows there is a secret behind Gil Kessler's eyes. That hunch from earlier on is really sticking around. God, do I hope they handle the reveal well. God, do I hope.
There's a secret behind those eyes. Trust my hunch on this one, I'm never wrong.
Our next scene involves Sophia awakening Dorothy from a midday nap to talk about Sicily's premier paediatrician, Bruno Bonifiglio, who was called in to deal with a case of athlete's foot amongst the wine stompers of her village when she was younger, as well as being the guy who prescribed arch supports for Mussolini, leading to this fun little joke by Dorothy.
Must have really helped his lower back when they hung him by his heels.
Fascists getting hung, an eternal comedy standard. Where is this story going, you might be asking, because trust me, I'm asking it too. Well, it's part of Sophia's proof that her hunches are always right, because she thought something was off about this guy, and it turns out that he was maybe doing some dodgy medical stuff to keep people hooked and buying his treatments. Oh, and he also apparently developed a foot fetish and suffocated in a rubber boot. Yeah, I don't know what's got to do with anything.
Actually, he developed a foot fetish and suffocated when he shoved his head in a lady's rubber boot.
Ma, don't ever wake me up again.
We then get Gil's press conference, with all the women watching him on the TV, as Gil responds to the allegations by confirming them, and saying that it's all true. That while a ton of rumours about him might be false, this one is totally 100% real. And Blanche's name then gets dragged out by all the reporters, a continuation of a joke in the scene, where it seems like Blanche might have hooked up with most of them, which, I mean, hell, you go, girl. And now it's Blanche who is getting dragged through the mud, especially in front of her friends who are annoyed that she lied to them, and they don't believe her, with Sophia even trying to sell the story to other magazines, because Sophia is kind of a shitty person.
Dorothy, why can't you be more like Jean? Scratch that. The lesbian thing, do you keep it under your hat or what?
Rose and Dorothy don't believe Blanche, because from all perspectives, it would seem as if Gil Kessler has no reason to lie about the affair. Being a married man running for office, and this being almost a stain on his career. Which is all kinds of upsetting for Blanche, because while she might sleep around, she isn't the sort of person who would do something like this.
And I also don't know why you just assume I'm guilty. Can you give me one good reason why I would lie to you?
Dorothy also makes a comment about how Blanche almost deserved this. Like this is the repercussions of her choices, which is, I mean, definitely not the feminist message we would want spread about, but is also just a really shitty, judgy thing to say about one of your friends. And this whole thing seems to be really tearing the friend group apart. So, Blanche marches on down to Gil's campaign office to challenge him on his lies about their affair. And we find out that Gil told this lie to the reporters because apparently nobody ever listens to him. It's at this point that we do really see the wimp thing that Sophia and Dorothy were going on about earlier. This man is a very passive person. And I mean, I worry that audiences at the time period would assume that such passivity is because of his revealed eventually identity as a trans man when it does get revealed, in spite of the fact that there are plenty of women in the show who are strong and forthright and aggressive. I worry that audiences will take that interpretation from it because ultimately bigotry, especially the sort of bigotry that comes from subconscious places like that, does ignore other facts and does ignore other pieces of information to create the shortest bridge between what you see and what you think is the truth about a group of people. Like, yeah, some trans men can be passive. It's not because they have feminine traits or feminine attitude, it's just because some people do be passive. What I'm getting at here is that such a thing has been stereotyped as gender specific, but anyone can be like that regardless of gender or gender history. Yet that information is not what most people are thinking when they see trans people showcase those traits.
Well, the reason is I was trying.
Why?
It all started.
Why?
Nobody ever listens to me. I'm a wimp, just like you said.
It's a cheap, simple transphobia that often gets ignored/defended because it relies not upon the show stating it, but on the audience getting the social context and making their own judgments from that. Regardless, Gil is using this affair to get people to like him better, because people are listening to him now and the polls are doing better. He uses a sob story about his life, how when he was younger nobody would notice him, even dropping this little hint here for you in the audience who might be in the know about there being a man inside of him.
But all the same, I always felt that deep inside me was a great man trying to get out.
But Blanche makes a passionate defense that Gil is an honest man, that the whole reason the women of Golden Girls back him is because of that fact, and for him to start lying now, merely to try and give himself a chance at political power, is exactly what they don't want.
I know what kind of man you are. You're an honest man. That's why we all believed in you.
It's a good speech by Blanche to Gil, and he does seem to seriously consider what it means and what he should do. Which leads to our next scene at the campaign office at night, the final event right before the election, and Sophia is still trying to figure out Gil's secret, when maybe the lesson here should be to mind your own fucking business, as Betty White might say, referring of course to her stance on the gay marriage bill in the USA, when she argued that she had seen many gay relationships that were just as real, if not more real, than straight ones.
I don't understand. It's such a personal, private business and none of mine.
The girls then have a spat, calling each other names, with Rose even saying something that I've not heard in a long, long time.
Traitor.
Tramp.
Backstabber.
Homewrecker.
Indian giver.
That's definitely an offensive term that you should absolutely not go around calling anybody because of its long negative association with the indigenous people of North America and being shady/conniving. It's pretty bad to hear so casually chucked out, and before you say, well, this was the 80s, slurs were still slurs in the 80s. They still made people feel terrible, and you could still choose to not use them in your scripts. There is always a choice that is made to include derogatory terms in this casual manner, and while it might indicate that the creators are immersed in a culture that so lightly throws those words out, that is in itself also a bad thing. Anyway, Gil makes another announcement here in front of all these people, taking on board the honesty thing that he was told by Blanche, and wanting to come clean if he's going to be elected as councilman. He then exonerates Blanche of the affair accusations, before following it up with the build-up to another reveal. A reveal that I've spoiled at every single possible point during this video essay, but that was also spoiled by the title and its inclusion in my The Trans Episode series. I guess what I'm saying here is that if you wanted the surprise, you wouldn't fucking be watching these videos. Gil announces that he had a surgery in 1968, and that before then, he had lived as a housewife to the frankly kind of off-putting glee and knowing nod of Sophia. All the Golden Girls are really shocked by this turn of events, as this is, well, a big deal to cis people to find out for some reason. Even though, really, it has no impact on them except for challenging their preconceived notions of gender and the binary thing that they have spent their whole life being raised in and taught to believe like it's some kind of Christian faith. So, actually, no, wait, I do see why it might be so surprising to find out trans people exist. And Sophia then reveals that she wasn't talking about rooting out the secret that Gil's a trans man, or that she was happy about being right on that front. It turns out she was focused on the fact that he's an Italian.
Anna Maria Bonaducci.
Please, look at his nose. Of course he's Italian.
What? Back at the house, Rose and Dorothy are talking about the Gil revelation, with Rose asking questions that are surprisingly sweet, if completely silly, which is actually sort of an encapsulation of her character, focusing on how exactly does that surgery work.
Is the man asleep during it?
I think so, Rose.
During this whole thing, they are still all referring to Gil as a man, and as a he, which is nice to see because many shows that I have watched from 20 years later were not able to keep that consistency and seem to be very stuck in the mindset that finding out someone is trans immediately denies them their gender identity, and you just revert to whatever sex was assigned to them by some stupid-ass doctor at birth. And they are both angry and upset, but not because they think Gil lied to them or because he is a trans man. They are upset because Gil dropped out of the race, and angry because Blanche hates them because Gil lied to them.
Terrible night, and I am very upset.
You mean because Gil dropped out of the election and Blanche hates us?
Like, it's interesting that the condemnation of Gil's lying is not his lying about the transgender identity. It's about him lying about the affair that hurt other people. A thing that is very fair to be mad about. It doesn't seem like a big distinction, but it is nice to see that comparison in action. The difference between those two and the responses to them. You do get a right to be annoyed at someone not sharing the truth that is affecting you or your friends. You don't get the right to be annoyed at someone for not sharing the truth that is their own private business. The Golden Girls all have a big group hug and resolve their issues, and are back to being best friends because this is a sitcom and every episode relies upon the fact that the main characters start in a similar place to how they ended. Otherwise the formula will stop working, and that's the episode. So what did we learn here? Well, we learned that an episode from 1988 was able to write a more inclusive and kind interpretation of a trans man than 99% of the shit I have covered on my channel. Which does, I think, indicate something I have noticed, which is that open hostility and aggressiveness towards trans people in media really did peak in the late 90s and 2000s and early 2010s. Before that period, trans people might deal with interpretations that are less than 100% accurate, but oftentimes didn't rely upon the same violent affectations that came up later, the same extreme gross reactions that would define stuff like How I Met Your Mother, Family Guy, South Park, 30 Rock, and Big Bang Theory. In fact, the show that was closest in presentation to these older shows and movies would be 2.5 Men's Trans episode. I don't have any long-term analysis for why this might be the case, or if this is in fact consistently true as of yet. Maybe in a couple of years' time, when I've released a few more videos and gotten a more general view, we can make some kind of definitive statement on this process. For now, all I will say is that it doesn't necessarily mean that society was a kinder place. Trans people absolutely did still get attacked and assaulted and mocked by cis people for being different back in that time period. But I wonder if the media's heightened attention on that community since the 90s and ramping up over the decades has led to a more intensified anger towards us. Another important takeaway is the fact that trans people have been in media and have existed for ages. I mean, we already all knew this, of course. You can look back at the high-profile case of Christine Jorgensen back in 1952, who was all over the news of that decade and was considered a positive role model, as well as someone who brought to light many of the issues that faced trans women, such as her inability to obtain any job except for public speaking, and that her fiancé, Howard Knox, lost his job when his engagement to her became public knowledge. It was a big deal for getting a lot of those early ideas out there about trans identity and trans issues, and that was 70 years ago. Even before then, we have surviving records from Magnus Hirschfeld's Institute for Sexualwissenschaft in the 1920s and 1930s that involved many discussions with trans people and transitioning. This shit goes all the way back through human history, and Golden Girls is just one of the oldest episodes that I've covered so far. I'm sure we're going to get a lot older with it as this channel goes on. As to the handling of the character, it was good to see that Gil was consistently referred to as a man, even after he announced his transition publicly. It was nice to see as well that the character's interest in his surgery was more out of curiosity than out of disgust, as well as the fact that this transition was not the major problem nor issue of the episode. In fact, this wasn't really a trans episode, because the trans revelation was more of a shock factor used at the end than as part of the narrative being far more centered on the Blanche affair situation. And while we could perceive that shock factor as being bad, that using trans people like that does lean into abusing our existence for the cis audience, it could also be seen as a positive thing in the sense that, well, anyone could be trans.
How could you know? No one knew.
This mild-mannered gentleman was, after all, and he had a wife and a life outside of that identity that we didn't know about. It's kind of a mixed bag with regards to what we can take away from it, and I think part of that is because of how little it really features into the episode. It's truly just a singular moment that we have to base a lot of our reaction to off of, and because of that, you can go in a few different directions. Ultimately, I would argue that it leans towards the more positive for the audience who would be watching this. I would think that it encourages attitudes that are less targeted of trans people and more understanding or more accepting. It also bears mention that there is no requirement on a trans person to ever have to publicly announce their transition or status to other people. That is their private business and judgment call to make if they feel safe to do so. Oh, before we go, the trans man is played by a man, John Shuck, and while it would be nice to have them played by a trans man, it is also still good to see that this did not go the route of having it be a woman in a suit. That to the audience it would seem as if a trans man could be any man because they are men after all. That was a weird sentence to write down, and I hope that it sounded better. And that's the video. Thank you for being a friend. We've travelled down a road and back again. Your heart is true. You're a pal and a confidant. If you threw a party, invited everyone you knew, you would see that the biggest gift would be from me, and the card attached would say, "Thank you for being a friend." Anyway, that's my parasocial duty done there, so you better like, share, subscribe and comment on this video, okay? If you really liked what I did and want to leave me a gift too, then the best way to do that is on my Patreon, Ko-Fi, or here on YouTube as a member. It really does help me to pay for stuff that I use to make these videos, such as keeping me alive. Trust me, I've crunched the numbers, did the maths, and if I was dead, the videos would be significantly harder to make. All of those in the $5 and up category should be scrolling past the screen right now, and I appreciate everyone on there for giving me the confidence to do YouTube in the capacity that I currently am, especially at a time like right now when I'm getting kicked out of this place literally in 2 or 3 days and have to move somewhere completely new, with all the associated costs of living alone. Other than all of that, thank you for watching this video, and I hope you have a great day. And on that note of getting kicked out, this is the last video I'm going to record at this place, in this set. The next video is going to be a completely new layout. I'm going to be standing. I'm going to be in front of a potentially larger wall. There'll be more stuff going on. It's potentially going to be a little bit awkward. But for now, let's say goodbye to this set that's been the one I've used for almost 4 years of YouTube now, across multiple channels. I'm gonna start tearing it down while sad music plays, if you don't mind me.